G'day guys, and today I want to share with you all a very important idea, something that I truly believe can change your perspective on life, the way you think, and ultimately how happy you are within this mortal coil. So if you haven't heard this idea, I think it's really important that you stick around to the end of the video to listen, and if you have, well, it can't hurt to hear it another time. So here we go, very important idea. You do not exist in order to be happy. Your own personal happiness is not part of the plan of life. Alright, let's think about this. It's very silly to think that just because your mum and dad had a tumble around in bed one time, that you, the product of that tumble, are entitled to happiness. You know, it's a non-consensual act to be born. You didn't choose to be born, you didn't earn any right to be born, it just happened without your consent. And you just pop out and you think you deserve some kind of reward because of that. It's very silly. This is a trap we fall into, I believe, because we are so materially wealthy compared to the rest of human history. You know, even someone who is on the lower end of the socio-economic scale nowadays is still an absolute king compared to, say, a medieval peasant or any member of the plebeian classes throughout history. We are very, very, extremely, unbelievably, unimaginably materially wealthy nowadays. And because we are so well off, again, relatively speaking to the rest of human history, we are no longer as tormented by nature, by plague, by famine, by other nations, other people. Because we're no longer so tormented by reality, we live a more carefree existence. You know, we have the freedom to make lots more mistakes nowadays than we could in the past. You know, if you accidentally slipped up in the past, you drop a knife, whatever, it cuts you, that could very easily get infected and you can die. But that happens nowadays, you nick yourself in the arm, it's like, oh, who cares? You know, maybe you'll give it a swab with some alcohol or whatever. Again, it's of no consequence anymore because we are so materially wealthy and we have access to really good nutrition, really good medicine and this sort of thing. But the interesting dichotomy that we're seeing emerge nowadays is that we have so much and yet we still seem to remain stubbornly unhappy. You know, you read the reports that depression, anxiety, all these mental illnesses seem to be on the rise, and it doesn't seem to make any sense because it's, you know, so easy to be happy nowadays because we can have all this stuff and all these wonderful things we can buy and be wealthy, and we're not going to die of sickness and we're not as tormented, yet we're more unhappy than ever. We lavishly supplement our material wants, yet I believe we fail to satisfy the needs of our minds. Our perspective on life, the way we look at it, is all wrong. What we need to remind ourselves, to avoid this sort of thing, is that life does not, in of itself, beget happiness. Now, for some of the very best writing on this perspective, I would recommend the works of Arthur Schopenhauer, a very, very pessimistic 19th century German philosopher, who critiqued the very idea that existence had value, which is something I think almost everyone in the entire world just takes for granted. Like, yeah, it's great being alive, it's valuable and that sort of thing, but no, he said no, and he critiqued that idea. He instead claimed that the world was the product of a blind and impossible to satisfy metaphysical will. Now, this is very depressing stuff. It does seem to throw you right into the deep end of feeling like crap about the world. But Schopenhauer did not mean to depress us. What he instead sought to do was free us from expectations that inspire only bitterness and misery. Now, for this, I want to chat about negative emotions. Now, negative emotions is, I think, a term that should always be put in quotations because they're not wholly negative. There can be positive benefits from feeling sad and angry and guilty and this sort of thing. It can lead to improvement, but that's not the focus of this video. That's just something I always want to remind people. Negative emotions arise from unfulfilled expectations. So if we check out some of the more common and knowledgeable negative emotions that I'm sure we've all felt in our period of life, if we're angry with someone, it's because they failed to meet our expectations. So, for example, we want them to show up on time and they don't. We had an expectation of our friend arriving on time and they didn't. It makes us angry. If we're shameful, well, obviously we had an expectation of ourselves. We wanted to perform in a certain capacity. We didn't meet that expectation and we feel terrible about it. Sadness, you know, we wanted things to go a certain way and they didn't. Again, unfulfilled expectations every time. That's where negative emotions come from. And so it makes a lot of sense that if we have this expectation of existing in order to be happy and the world is there so we can go out and frolic in the fields and be happy and have all this lovely stuff, well, it seems like an absolute inevitability that you're going to end up feeling miserable in this world because the world does not exist to make you happy. if you have this perspective that life exists in order to be happy, that's your purpose, that's why you're here, and you deserve happiness and that sort of thing, then you're not going to be living a very good life. Your life is going to be full of torment and embitterment, because you're going to continually come up against this fact that precious few things in life want you to be happy. You could probably count the amount of things that want you to be happy maybe on your hands and feet. Most of the world, from people to environment to diseases to weather to rodents to emotional hells to injury, do not give a single fuck what you want. You can't even fit your hand all the way down into a jar of Pringles. Life is harsh, man. You think if everything was going to be happy, you'd be able to at least do that. But no, you can't even get at the last chip without being disappointed and enraged. Or so I've heard. That's not me, guys, I swear. I'm not bringing all this up and taking time out of my day to speak about it to drive you towards, life sucks and pessimism and nihilism and there's no way for life to have value and this sort of thing. Life can have value. It's just life does not exist in order to make you happy. And I think this is a very poor expectation to have because, again, you're going to be continually disappointed because you're going to keep coming up against the fact that life does not exist to make you happy. And the big problem that this can cause is that you can become embittered towards life itself. You become resentful to life itself because you go, why isn't this doing what I want? And that's a big problem because it doesn't have to do what you want. Indeed, the chances that it would do what you want are astronomical. You're not a god. You're not omnipotent. You're just a human. You're just, one of, how many humans have there been? 108 billion? And that's even implying that humans are special in life, which we're not. We're just the most evolved organism. And why would the most evolved organism, the apex predator, have any more say than anything else? It's like trying to control a weather. You can imagine some apex predator in Africa or whatever, the lion, the crocodile, the hippo even. Hippos are really dangerous, guys. They're top of the food chain and all this sort of stuff, but they can't control the weather. They're still tormented by disease and the sun and the fact that the water runs out, half the year and they have to die of thirst. Even these pinnacles of creation have to suffer, and humans are no different. Just because we can do lots of wonderful things doesn't mean that life is nice to us. For 99% of human history, right up until this point, guys, even 100 years ago, life was fucking nasty. And it's only just got really good, and it has only taken us this really short amount of time, I feel, to forget the fact that life is full of torment and misery and inevitable suffering. And it's not necessarily inevitable that you're going to be happy in the midst of all. And again, I really just want to nail home that I'm not trying to depress you. I'm not trying to drag you down into a pit of misery and nihilism. I'm trying to free you from unhealthy expectations that I think could be inspiring bitterness and misery within your life. And this terrible expectation, this false expectation, is that you exist in order to be happy, that you deserve happiness and this sort of thing. And no, you don't. You have to earn happiness. And there are ways to do that. There are many, many different ways to earn happiness. You already know. But, these negative emotions, and again, negative emotions in quotations, arise from unfulfilled expectations. And if one of the core directing tenets of your life is based on an expectation that will never be fulfilled, well, you're not going to be living a very good life now, are you? Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.